heading back to the station, and literally as I got to the junction of where this incident had happened, a call came in, a female stabbed to death. Horrific domestic homicide. I'm not going back into the police station, obviously, I'm making my way to this job. It was just absolute chaos when we got there. Didn't know where the offender was, there were people out on the street screaming, I was being directed into this building, and as you walk in, it was absolutely pitch black, and in front of me, down the corridor, was Monica, who was collapsed in a prone position, still alive. I could feel the blood soaking through my pants. You get a formalisation or accustomed to the use of seeing dead bodies. You're in that Bobby mode where, right, I need to get evidence. You're documenting things in your pocket notebook, times, dates, what's going on, bagging of clothing for evidence procedures, exhibit tags, all that kind of stuff. You get back to the nick, and then you have a quick debrief, and then you're straight into statement mode, and then you go home. And then it's like, what the fuck just happened?
Welcome to the Pocket Sergeant podcast. Today's guest isn't just a serving police officer, he's a man challenging a century-old system from within. Lee Broadbent is leading a legal fight to overturn the 100-year-old ban on police officers joining trade unions. He believes officers deserve a voice, proper representation, and the same rights as other workers. Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Lee, for those who don't know your story, how did your policing journey begin?
Well, it's a bit of a checkered policing journey. I mean, there's been plenty of ups and downs in it, but essentially I joined Greater Manchester Police in 2006. I was a PCSO prior to that with the same force, but only for around a year. Essentially, I used that as a taster to try and find what policing was like, whether it was going to be right for me, and then fully committed in 2006 and have been a serving officer since. Over that time, I've had many challenges. I've suffered from complex PTSD in relation to incidents that I'd suffered during the course of my career. I've suffered from burnout because of the various activities that I've been involved with. But most prominently, I think I'm probably known for the pension challenge, which started back in 2015, and then subsequently the legal challenge against the Federation for victimisation and discrimination, which ran on the back of the pension challenge. And that leads me to where we are now.
What made you want to become a cop?
You know, it's the old cliche, isn't it? Everybody says the same. You wanted to join to make that little bit of a difference. I think I had a particularly good experience with a neighbourhood sergeant on the town centre where I used to work. So when I first ventured out into working, essentially, I was quite young when I picked up a number of like Saturday jobs on the town centre in various stores, whether that be Thornton's or the Body Shop. And there was an area sergeant called Tony who was really, really good and proactive. He used to come round and visit the stores, and he used to always take time out. Now how busy he was, and just have a 10-minute chat with me. And I first think I broached the idea of what's policing like in general terms with him a number of years ago, probably when I was about 16, 17-year-old. And then from that moment on, I kind of, everything that I was doing was then sort of aimed towards policing. So the stuff that we were doing in the retail setting around customer service, customer expectations, etc. And then I did a professional course for paralegal studies in law to try and get my legal aspect up to scratch. It was all kind of directed towards then becoming a police officer and getting that head start above other candidates, essentially, because Tony always pressed on me that it was a very, very difficult application process, and most people don't get through on the first application, you know, and part of that is to test the character and the strength of the person applying and the resilience. Fortunately, I was fortunate enough to get through on the first time round, so it's, and here I am, 20 years later.
Going back to what you said just previously there about the complex PTSD, it's unreal the amount of people that I've had on the podcast already that have been diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't realise it's so common throughout policing.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think part of that comes with the recognition within the service itself that, you know, there's something going on in the background for officers. And there has been certainly in my career, there's been a shift in terms of the welfare and the provisions within forces. When I first started out, welfare was almost non-existent. You know, the welfare existed of a chat with your mate in the parade room. Sometimes that's the best way of welfare, as we've touched on some previous things. But the actual provision provided by the force in its legal obligations to its officers was very, very patchy. Now we have trim processes. We have all kinds of processes geared at recognising or understanding what officers are going through. And we're encouraging officers to speak out early, which is something that we didn't do in my time. And so there's bound to be a natural growth in the amount of people that are probably being diagnosed. But I would argue that given what police officers are exposed to over their careers, everybody is going to have some mental scarring from being a police officer. Whether you served in the 70s, 80s or 90s prior to recognition of PTSDs or stuff in that line, the likelihood is there's something in the background that you just haven't had formally recognised, but it's there, and it's probably prevalent in most.
So going back to the legal challenge, have you always been interested in worker rights and representation, even before this campaign?
Yes, essentially, yes. I think I clicked very early on in my policing career, and I think it happened around the time that I suffered, that I was exposed to one of the more traumatic events in my career. That recognition afterwards, that there was a general lack of support there, that there was something going on, even though you still...
Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked about it previously. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you all right to go into a bit more detail around that?
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't recognise it at the time because it was just one of those things that you rock up and you show up to. But in 2009, so quite early on in my career, I dealt with a particularly, for me anyway, horrific domestic homicide. And the day started out just as you normally would do. So when you look back at it and you go through that trim process, or like I had to do, you have to go through that EMDR where you're picturing the incident, you're breaking it down stage by stage, second by second, almost as if you're creating a movie scene. The day just started as normal. I rocked up probably 45 minutes, an hour before my shift was due to start, like most cops do when you're on response, just to get your day in order, go through the emails. A job came in at the top end of the division for youth causing. I think they were damaging a bus shelter or something along those lines. Yeah. The afternoon shifts, were on the way back in, ready for handover. I picked up a car, I went out, dealt with it, no trace, heading back to the station, and literally as I got to the junction of where this incident had happened, or near enough, a call came in, a female stabbed to death. So you go into that thing of shit, right, I'm not going back into the police station, obviously I'm making my way to this job. And when you get there, given the information, I was thinking, well, we're managing a scene, essentially. We'll get there, other patrols will arrive. And it wasn't. It was just absolute chaos when we got there. Didn't know where the offender was. There were people out on the street screaming. I was being directed into this building. And as you walk in, it was absolutely pitch black. I went up a flight of stairs, turned onto the first platform at the top. And in front of me, down the corridor, was Monica, who was collapsed in a prone position, still alive. I could still see that she was breathing and she was gasping. And you go into full life-saving mode, so I'm looking for any injuries that I could find. I could feel the blood as I was knelt down next to Monica. I could feel the blood soaking through my pants.
What was going through your head at the time? Can you remember?
Panic. It was unlike any situation that I'd ever experienced or dealt with at any point in my life, not just my professional policing life. I mean, I've dealt with things before that. You go to sudden deaths and you go to what is colloquially known as the nan downs, so to speak, where you get a formalisation or accustomed to the use of seeing dead bodies. I've dealt with serious assaults where ears are hanging off people or people are being bitten, etc., and they're horrifically disfigured. But never in that situation where I'm alone with a woman who'd been stabbed multiple times, with people screaming. The children were on the stairs behind overlooking, screaming, help me mum kind of thing. And then, you throw yourself into that situation. It was only after, I mean, I don't know how much detail you want, but the incident lasted quite a long time because of the way that the information came in that the female had been stabbed to death. that's how it was relayed to the ambulance service. So they weren't making it on a category 1 blue light. They were just plodding to the location as though they just had to confirm life extinct. I pressed my button to request patrols come, but it was about 5, maybe 6, possibly longer minutes before the next patrol came to assist me, which was my work wife, Sarah. So I was alone, just trying to provide life-saving provisions.
Yeah.
For a good 5, maybe 10 minutes. And then as it unfolded, the ambulance, I think, arrived about 15 minutes during this. I was performing CPR in the ambulance while we were on our way up to hospital. We were cutting Monica's clothes off as the medical staff tried to intervene, all the way to the surgery where I was tying the mask of the surgeon, the actual mask that the surgeon was using as he was cutting into a sternum to try and do an electric start on her heart. So it was, as an experience...
So you were exposed to a hell of a lot there.
Oh, massively. But at the same time, you're in that Bobby mode where, right, I need to get evidence. You're documenting things in your pocket notebook, times, dates, what's going on, bagging of clothing for evidence procedures, exhibit tags, all that kind of stuff. And you get back to the NIC, and then you have a quick debrief with the CID team to let them know what's happening. And then you're straight into statement mode. And then you go home. And then it's like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
There's no real time to process it, and you're that shattered from nights that my head just hit the pillow and it was thingy. I probably had a very, very interrupted sleep, woke up, etc. But you just put that down to nights, don't you? And then
what support did you get from the job after that incident?
None. None. There was nothing. But again, I think sometimes it boils down to I've got to accept a little bit as well that I probably went into masking, because what happened when I went back into work was congratulations, was praise, was you did an absolutely fantastic job. You know, we managed to, whilst I was doing CPR and other patrols were arriving, we got the scene on, people were being exited from the building. The offender looked like he was coming back towards the building, so we'd arrested him. So when you look at it from a policing perspective, it was a grade 1A job. We detained an offender. We tried to preserve life. We'd gathered evidence. On the back of it, he was sentenced, I think it was 19 years. But in that next day, afterwards, it was just praise. It was like, well done. You know, you did absolutely everything you could do. And there was that feeling of that sense of achievement to some degree in, you know, it was pretty fucking bad what just went on. But we tried our best. We did what we could and thereon. But it didn't stop those internal feelings I was feeling. But then you didn't have that same connection or support with the organisation where you say, no, actually, I'm struggling sleeping here, or I'm getting these intrusive thoughts. But I just threw myself into the job to try and distract myself.
What were you feeling at the time?
Quite doubtful. You know, as you probably do, you're questioning, did I do everything that I could do? Could I have done something different? What if I'd have done this? What if I'd have done that? Should I have started CPR that little bit earlier with that? But there was no one to talk through it with you to say that actually, you know, no matter what you did, I know now, but I mean, Monica suffered, I think on, if I'm correct, it was 36 injuries, including, you know, serious abdomen injuries in terms of internal bleeds and defensive injuries on her arms, etc. So there's absolutely nothing I could have done other than be there with her when she died. You do go into that self-doubt mode, though, when you don't have that comfort thing, when you don't have people saying, you know, chances are she'd never have survived.
So how did that affect you then mentally?
Initially, I probably didn't pick up on it because, like I said, I threw myself back into the job. 3 years in, I was probably job pissed, as they would describe. You know, I'm still rocking up early, still getting out, still going to the immediate response job, still getting myself in bother, attending incidents on your own where you might necessarily not do. But it is that dedication that you wanted to show and that commitment to the job. And as a result of that, I mean, we were going through a period as well at that time. Austerity was biting, response teams were shrinking. So you were going to more and more traumatic incidents. There were fewer of you. But it was just seen as this is what policing's about. And I was throwing myself into that, and then I was distracting myself with other aspects. Because as it probably as it started to manifest and I was burying it, the more and more I got involved in other stuff, like the representation of police officers, campaigning to be a Fed rep quite early on kind of thing. And then as the changes came out about the pensions and the Windsor review, I was able to focus my other skills and energy into something completely different. And therefore my day was filled. I didn't have time for these things to come to the front of my head because I had a growing family. My son was born in 2011. All the changes around the pension stuff, all the things at work, everything was just compact into a day where I'd come home, I'd do bits, and then I'd go to sleep, and then the next day it'd be straight back on the daily grind.
So how did it manifest itself?
In 2019, I burnt out. So when the pension challenge had been successful and we'd finally reached that sort of conclusion, it was a realisation that, shit, I'm not going to be able to distract myself with anything else here. Yeah. I'm not going to be able to stop running. And I hit burnout. And I remember it. I mean, I had several cases of misconduct and gross misconduct that I was assisting officers with. So some complex cases that I was providing representation for and arguments in misconduct hearings. And I remember, I don't even remember how I got to work, but I just got to work. I sat down and I just cried. Everything just came out. I completely broke down in work. Took 2 weeks off, thinking, as you do, all right, I'll make some little bits of a changes. Then I went straight back in, and then within probably a month of that, I'd burnt out completely. I ended up taking a significant period of time off, more than I'd ever taken previously, where I received counselling for burnout. And once I'd started to put the burnout down, i.e. clear space for other things, that's when the PTSD hit me like I couldn't believe. And it was all around the time of COVID as well. And hand gels, and it just hit me, floored me. And I found myself in the arms of Police Care UK, seeking some charitable help. Got 12 sessions of EMDR. Again, there was nothing really from the job. I contacted our occupational health unit and our welfare support provisions, but they were so overwhelmed that the advice of the welfare officer was you're better off reaching out to a police charity, which I did, thankfully. Like I said, I reached out to Police Care UK, and they got me back on the straight and narrow.
Do you think the job have got everything in place at the moment to help cops with trauma?
No.
What could they do better, do you think?
It's funny because I had this discussion with a chap called Graham Golden recently, who's very involved in active bystandership, and he's saying in terms of the culture within policing, we look at our welfare provision now. I think the job, don't get me wrong, the job has got a lot better in recognising welfare and in recognising that officers are suffering, but it's still abdicating its responsibilities, and it abdicates it. And Graham picked up on a perfect message. When we go to somebody and say, I'm struggling here, what's the conversation that we initially have? Because essentially it says, have you contacted the employment assistance programme? Have you contacted OccuHealth? There's a push away. Yeah. It's almost like we've lost that personal connection, be able to sit down with somebody and say, oh, okay, tell me about it. Because we're all busy and we've all got a full workload. There's not that active listening sometimes from those frontline, our colleagues, sergeants who are overworked, inspectors who are overworked, etc. Especially when the pressure's on into say, there's so many police officers off at the minute, signed off long term with stress, mental health issues, etc. We can't afford to lose another one. But we kind of take a position where welfare isn't our responsibility because we've now got employment assistance programs in place, or we've got people within an occupational health department, or there's various charities. So it's a signposting mechanism as opposed to a personal mechanism. And I think from the first interaction that you have with the welfare support within policing, it's almost as if to say, well, okay, yeah, we've got something for that, but it's over there, go and speak to them.
Yeah.
So I think we can get a lot better at sitting down with people at that point where we're recognising, everyone says it's a cliche, isn't it, when you say, are you okay? And people, oh, yeah, I'm fine. And I say, no, are you really okay?
Yeah.
We never take that second step. Very, very rarely are we confident enough that we possess the skills and the time or can create the space to have that second okay conversation with somebody if they turn around and say, actually, no, I'm not. I'm struggling. So yeah, I think we can get a lot better at that. Instead of abdicating our position away to the various programs, create that time, create that space and culture internally where actually we're having that one-to-one connection with the people that we expect to back us up in life-changing situations, but we can't have that. We can't find that 5 minutes, 10 minutes to have that life-changing conversation sometimes.
I certainly didn't think I'd be chatting with you about PTSD when
No.
I wanted to talk about the legal challenge, but it's fascinating the fact that you've used that almost as a distraction, really.
It was
to what was going on.
Correct. It was kind of a what was probably a healthy distraction that became an unhealthy distraction, because as I figured out, I wasn't dealing with what I needed to deal with. But down the back of that, it came something absolutely monumental in terms of the legal challenge to the government's pension position. So there was a whole host of good that came out of something that personally might have been struggling from, but it manifested in a good way as opposed to a self-destructive way where I was drinking alcohol or having suicidal tendencies. So there's benefits in it. I'm not going to degenerate what we did, but it was, out of something bad came something extremely positive.
How are you now?
Good. I've got a handle on it. You never clear yourself of these things. Something always sneaks up on you, or there's potential to get caught one day where, if you're not particularly looking after yourself, because it is a constant realization that you have to put the effort into you, as much as you would put into the job. As I've always said, if you're not looking after yourself, how do you expect to be able to look after other people? And there are times, that I get distracted and I put myself into a situation. There's a great tendency with this legal challenge as it mounts up, there's going to be pressures coming in. Will I lose focus? But I've got a good people behind me. I've got a good supportive wife who understands me and who can see early, as I can now, when I may be on a decline in terms of not looking after myself, and quickly snaps me back into it. So yeah, it's a constant, not battle, but it's a constant balance to find and understand yourself. But it's all about taking some time for yourself, first of all, and being able to sit down and say, right, where am I today? Or if you reacted poorly to something, to stop and say, why was that? What prompted that reaction? Is something going on? Because that's not quite you. Yeah.
So this legal challenge, you're currently challenging a 100-year-old ban on police union membership. Where did that come from?
It stemmed, again, there's the backstory to it, and it all goes back to 2015 and the pension reforms that the government were bringing in place. At the time that those reforms were coming through, the Federation had taken a stance which aligned with the government in that it supported the provisions that the government tried to introduce. I'm going to try and keep a brief overview because I don't want to switch people off with all the legislation. It's a complex position. But essentially, the government were introducing changes to the pensions, which meant that those younger in service would see a significant reduction in their future financial pension than those older in service. So you had a situation where, as a younger officer, I was working alongside an older officer, and essentially we were being paid differently for doing the same job, because that older officer was going to get far greater remuneration in retirement than I would ever be able to realise. And I just saw that as manifestly unfair, as did most people. Let's face it, most people that sat down and read through it thought, what the hell? How can this be right? But the Federation aligned themselves with the position of government, and they said that they didn't believe there was a legal avenue to challenge this. Well, I disagreed, as is a group of us. And through the power of Facebook, which was a fledgling thing back then, we brought together a group of officers from up and down the country. I think at our height, we had about 55,000 members of that closed Facebook group.
And you've still got that Facebook group, haven't you?
We have, yeah. We're about 33,000 members now, as people have retired or interest has dwindled off.
What's it called if people want to join it?
They can't see it. They can't search it. It's part of the security mechanisms. You've got to be a police officer. You've got to already know somebody in the group, and then you've got to fill out a list of online questions to make sure we're all above board, etc.
Okay.
But it's called, off the top of my head, I think it's Cops Against or something along those lines. It did start out something very long-winded, Cops Against the demolition of our terms and conditions of service, but it kind of whittled down to just Cops Against. So yeah, from on the back of that, the pension reforms went through, we had this dispute with the police federation around their legal position. Ultimately, the challenge that the firefighters, judiciary, and that we brought in the Aarons and others cases was successful, which meant that officers were returned back to a more favourable position for a period of time. Then came the whole thing of the federation decided to launch its own challenge to support those officers that weren't part of our legal challenge, which everybody could have done, which then put us at odds because now the federation are using our legal argument and our platform in the Aarons and others claims to secure the same rights for everybody else and compensation, but would refusing to contribute towards our claim. And throughout the period that we'd been arguing with government, the Federation had sent out misinformation against us. They essentially treated us as though we were an enemy within the organisation. The information that they sent out to others was misleading. They discouraged officers from taking up their own legal claims. And now all of a sudden they wanted to do what we had done on the back of our vehicle, but without recognising or contributing. So we then looked at the Federation position. We tried to engage with the Federation and encouraging it into an agreement with us, but unfortunately that didn't work and we ended up at court against our own staff association, essentially.
So for those unfamiliar with what the key differences are between Police Federation and a true trade union, are you able to explain the difference between the two?
Well, essentially, yeah. I mean, the Federation is a body that's constructed in statute. It's created by law to funnel police officers into it for representation. When you look at the definition of what a trade union is, or other associations, etc., it generally falls under the Trade Union Act. And essentially, the difference is that those bodies are created by members. People have said, we need this, we want this vehicle in order to represent us. And then they go about registering or creating that union and organising under the banner of it. We've never had that position. Back in 1918, when the National Association of Police and Prison Officers Union was around, they entered into this dispute with government, ended up into strike action. And in order to try and curtail the ability of police officers to do that again, the government removed our ability to join and form trade unions, our own bodies, and gave us a body and said, this should be enough. This should be a vehicle in which you can recognise, organise under. And in return for your ability not to strike or not to take industrial action, etc., we'll put in certain provisions where you'll have audiences with chief officers, you'll have audience with ministers, and that was supposed to be the counterbalance. So there's the key difference in that regard. When you look at the Federation and you say, does it stand up to the basic elements of what Article 11 would recognise as a trade union body or a association or vehicle on which officers can associate? The clear answer is no, it doesn't.
So what would union membership actually change for police officers on the ground, do you think?
First and foremost, it creates choice. And I think that's what the important thing to recognise that what this challenge is about. It's about creating the conversations and the space for choice. My main argument over the last 10 years is that the Federation has failed in listening to the membership. It's got itself in a real position where it now doesn't have the trust or support of a significant proportion of its membership, but its members have no other option but to continually subscribing into it. So if you're from my position, for instance, and I just use me as because I know my story, I joined as a Federation rep. I try to engage in the organisation in the usual ways to try and create the change from within, to try and create that momentum from within. I was seen as the enemy within the organisation, despite having the support of a good number of my colleagues from Greater Manchester who's elected me as the chair of the Greater Manchester Police Federation branch. Despite that, despite being able to be in the organisation, it wasn't willing to change, listen, or have the space or conversations within. It continually took the mindset that you were the enemy. And as such, I was victimised. I left the organisation. I was discriminated against, as it turns out, from the court rulings. And yet I have no other option but to continually pay my subscription to an organisation that has catastrophically failed in its duties and services towards me. And that can't be right. It can't be right for any police officer. For instance, if you were to take a claim against your employer for race discrimination or sex discrimination, and you went to the Federation and they assessed your claim as initially having merits, but then withdrew funding, where else can you go?
Yeah.
If you're not happy with the service the Federation have provided you overall, where else can you go to redress that? And the answer is nowhere. So we're stuck in an organisation, and that monopoly creates complacency, in my view. It doesn't provide the impetus for change that the organisation needs. And we're left with a declining representative base. So choice will hopefully not only bring about change, but it will provide a continual driver on those associations or unions wanting to represent police officers. It will provide that continual drive to be member focused, to do what it can to obtain that custom, because now you've not got an organisation which is heavily reliant. So I'm not reliant, probably not the right word, but you've got 90 odd, 100 odd thousand officers paying into the organisation because they've got no choice. Whereas if now you're having to fight for every member, then your view, your mindset shifts from one which is focused on the organisation to one which is focused on the individual member.
I mean, we've talked briefly about the right to strike and industrial action. Will that be part of this trade union if it's successful?
No, and I suppose the two arguments are very, very different. So I think it would be important for me to stress, I did take legal advice on the right to strike, as well as the right to pursue industrial actions, as well as the right to form and join our own trade union associations. The door wasn't closed on either piece of advice, but what the advice suggested was that the government would have a stronger case in curtailing the right to police officers to take industrial action, but they had a weaker case in the blanket prohibitions that are currently provided in that officers can't form or join their own associations. So we had a bit of a conversation as to what's the best option here. Do we go for the big fight altogether and have it both, potentially end up in court for a number of years, or do we have the winnable argument early, and then once we've got a membership and a mandate base, do we then ballot that membership, have that conversation and see actually what other people want as opposed to the whole hog? So we decided to go for the quick, what we would see as a quick win, to get to create the change, to create the choice initially, and then we can always have the arguments going forward.
I think you need some funding as well, don't you, in order to do this? Yeah,
I mean, as you probably aware with Rick Pryor's case and Richard Cook, who, for those that don't know, they're crowdfunded and judicial reviews aren't cheap. We have a stretch target, so an overall target of about £150,000, and that would see the legal fees for ourselves, and should the argument fail, the legal fees for the government would be included in that as well, because if you lose, you're liable for the other side's costs. So we have a stretch target of £150,000, but initially...
Where do people need to go if they want to donate to the cause?
If they go to the Breaking the Monopoly crowd justice site platform, then you can go to that platform, and there's a great bit of information on there as to what the challenge is about, how you can get involved in the challenge, and how to make a donation or a pledge.
What have you reached so far?
So far, we've raised, on our initial drive, we raised $14,550, and that was to secure the original cost of the legal advice around that. We're now just over 3,500 for our initial 6,000 target, because we're aiming at 6,000 at a minute because we believe the case is strong. We don't believe that the government have got any viable justifications to combat our claim that we should be able to unionise, and so we're hoping or aiming to try and resolve this politically as opposed to a full-blown battle in the courts.
Is there a date that you want to achieve this financial goal by?
The 6,000, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I'd like to achieve that within the month because we're looking at funding the back and forth between solicitors here and providing legislation. We believe it's a perfect vehicle for these changes to be involved in very, very early. So the government have got the Employee Rights Bill passing through government at the minute, and by its own argument, the government wants to strengthen the rights of employees. Us essentially. So we
Yeah.
believe within that piece of legislation, specifically around trade unions and the ability to form and join trade unions, which is something that the government are looking at. They believe that the barriers at the minute are high, so they're looking at lowering those, which is of great assistance, giving us greater rights around arbitration and being able to represent members. We think that there's a vehicle there already progressing through government, which we can jump into to bring about the changes that we believe are needed, and that's where our focus is at the minute in creating that change.
Do you feel supported by the rest of policing in doing what you're doing?
Yes, I do. I'm incredibly grateful. I mean, I get hundreds of messages a week, either private messages or on various platforms, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter, whether it be LinkedIn. And I do think there's general support out there for what we are trying to achieve. I think it's helped the fact that we've had successes with the pension challenge and the Federation discrimination and victimisation claim. They certainly think that there's a legitimacy there that people see with me, and therefore, yeah, I think that transfers into this one as well. So yeah, I do think there's the support there.
Have you ever been advised, formally or informally, just to let this one go and stay quiet?
No. No, I haven't. I say that
because the only reason I asked that is because when there was all this pension challenge going on and all the rest of it, I know the Federation were very much like, no, this isn't true. You're not going to get anywhere, and it was very much a case of stay quiet and let things pan out
Yeah, very much. But there's
you've
not
not
been that
experienced.
pushback. No,
Oh,
and
right,
I think the
okay.
Federation are being cautious because the last time they did that, they ended up victimising officers. And this is no different. All we're actually doing is pursuing a legitimate legal argument. It's not for the Federation to interject and say whether we should or shouldn't. I've not had any curly fingers from bosses or anything saying, leave this alone, mate, quiet off, go away. I've had counsel from other people in terms of, my wife said, is this really a fight you want to have? You know how dirty it got last time. It's probably going to be dirtier this time because you're threatening the actual monopoly that the organisation has. But someone's got to do it. I think there is a genuine need for change to be made. We've had change throughout policing over decades and decades, but the one thing that has remained stagnated is representation, and the one thing which has declined are officers' terms and conditions. There's a correlation somewhere in between that, and it needs to be challenged, and I think that, so...
Have you had any conversations with College of Policing, Home Office, or any of the police force leaders about the challenge?
Yes. I have.
Are you allowed to tell?
I'm going to keep my hands close to my chest on that one because it's a political thing, you know, and the last thing I want to do is identify people or persons and say they're incredibly supportive and then burn them for other people. So I'm not going to do that. What I can say is from the conversations that I've had with police chiefs, with senior figures, even with Home Office officials via other people as well, is that there is a degree of support, and it generally feels that we're pushing on a slightly open door on this one.
Okay, so here's a scenario then. Your legal challenge is successful in the next 12 months. There's a brand new trade union specifically for police officers or whatever. What would that look like?
Again, we're working on it. There are plans that are going on in the background to understand it, because one thing that we want to say is, at the point that legislation changed, there needs to be a viable alternative for people to go towards. Those viable alternatives, by the way, already exist. You know, if the government turned around and said, okay, we're removing the blanket prohibitions, you can join any trade union you want, albeit you can't take part in any strike action and you can't take part in any political party activity. Unison could quickly create a police branch. Unite could do the same. You know, the Black Police Officers Association might say, we want to be recognised, then they want to do the same. So there are already platforms. But if people wanted something different created by the people that have led the pension challenge, by the people that have led the other campaigns, then there needs to be a viable thing ready to go. We're currently restricted from putting anything in motion because the legislation in Section 64 prevents it. And therefore, we have to put the work in the background to understand what it would look like, how it would differ, what we would be able to do. We're already forming connections and having conversations with many people around, you know, basic things like member platforms, basic things like membership databases, all that kind of stuff. So we're having those conversations, but they're not yet ratified in plans. And so it'd be remiss of me to say, this is what it's going to look like, this is what it's going to do. Because ultimately, that would be me doing what the Federation have done in saying, here's a product, now accept it. It needs to be membership built. It needs to be driven from the front. So it's going to be a lot of dialogue and conversation as these things go and progress to say, well, actually, what is it that you want it to do? What's this vehicle that we actually want, and how do we shape it together? Because if you get that buy-in early, where you are creating the conversations, listening, and you got that feedback loop where you're providing that information back, then you're going to get a more engaged and active membership, as opposed we've got now decisions being made for you, you being kept at arm's length, and then you're just then there to ratify a decision. That's not what we want.
If you had the Home Secretary sat in front of you now, rather than me sat in front of you, what would you say? Essentially, this is a no-brainer. It's a very, very quick and easy fix for the government to take. As I said, there's already legislation going through government in the Employment Rights Bill in which changes can be made to allow and to introduce this and to repeal aspects of Section 64. It's a no-brainer. Policing and police officers are asking for change and choice. Your job as a Home Secretary is to create that for them. And that's a good way to end this podcast. But it's hard not to get excited about this because we've seen the success of the pension challenge. And whilst this is going to take a little bit of time, I'm hoping, like you, that police officers in the near future will have more of a choice going forward.
Hopefully. Like I said, I'm incredibly excited and I'm incredibly optimistic around
and passionate.
And passionate, yeah. But the advice that we've had back and just looking at the landscape, it is a no-brainer. It's really exciting times. I hope people get behind it. I hope people can feel as passionate as I do about it as well. Sometimes you have to be the change you want to see, and this is the time.
Absolutely. You've got two types of people. You've got those that will just sit back, complain and moan about something, and then a smaller minority that will go out and actually do something, put themselves on the line in order to do it, which we know that you have done.
Yeah, but there's a tipping point. It's like Simon Sinek mentions it in various things. It's the law of diffusion. There are always a number of people that early adopt it. They're the ideas people, 2% of the population. Then you get 12% that are the early adopters. They can see the idea, they want to get behind it, and they're the first to do it. That's how I've always seen the people in the pension challenge. We had the idea around changing or challenging the government's position on pensions. We asked people to follow us, and you had 18,000 people that threw themselves at it and said, yeah, I want to be part of that. I can be involved in it. And it's the same with this. You've got people that are throwing money within the pot to try and make this happen. They're your early adopters. Once other people that are sat in the middle see changes happening and see changes coming, they too start to tip. And when you get to that certain tipping point, everything becomes that little bit realer. We are really, really at that edge of this is just an idea into this is going to happen, and things are going to be very, very different.
Just in case listeners or viewers missed it the first time round, where can they go and donate?
To the Breaking the Monopoly Crowd Justice page. So if you just type in Crowd Justice Breaking the Monopoly, it'll throw up a link. Go there, read our backstory, read what we're trying to achieve, and any donation, great or small, is much appreciated.
That's perfect. Well, Lee, as part of you coming on the podcast, I'm going to send you a Pocket Sergeant podcast mug. How about that?
Thank you very much. That's great. I wasn't expecting that.
No, it was great to have you on as a guest. Thanks very much, and we'll get you back on shortly and to give us an update on what you're doing.
Yeah, by any means, at any point I can provide any updates, I will do.
That's perfect. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, mate.